Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. Tonight, it's Wendigo night. So enjoy and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I took my dog for a walk in the woods near my house on a hot summer evening. As we walked deeper into the woods, the sun was starting to go down and I could hear birds chirping and leaves rustling. I started to feel like someone or something was watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being followed. My usually energetic dog was also starting to act strangely. He was pulling on his leash and whining as if he didn't want to move forward. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but the feeling kept getting stronger. I sped up and tried not to notice the feeling that something was getting closer to us. Just as I was about to turn around, I heard a faint rustling in the bushes behind me. I turned around, but nothing was there. My heart was racing, and I knew I had to get out of there as soon as possible. I grabbed the leash for my dog and started running. I didn't look back until I was back in my own yard. When I locked the door behind me, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was still out there, waiting for its chance to strike as the night went on. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was still waiting for me out there. Every time I heard a sound, my heart skipped a beat, and just as I was getting ready to watch TV, I would jump at every shadow. I heard a sound like someone tapping on the window. At first, I thought it was just a branch moving in the wind, but the tapping kept going on, getting louder and more constant. I got up, my heart beating fast, and went to see what was going on. As I looked out the window, I saw a dark humanoid figure standing there, staring back at me with a sinister smile on its face. I was so scared that I couldn't move while the figure kept tapping on the window. The power suddenly flickered and went out, leaving the room dark. In a panic, I fumbled around for my phone to call for help, but when I tried to turn it on, the battery was dead. I had no one else around, without a way to get help. As I moved away from the window, my heart was racing. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know what to do or where to go. As the dark figure kept tapping on the window, I knew I couldn't get out of the room and hide from the terror outside. I was terrified when I heard the doorknob rattle and the door crack as the dark figure outside pushed on it. I didn't know what to do, and I knew that whatever was trying to get in was stronger than me. Just when I thought it was all over, everyone stopped talking. I held my breath and tried hard for several long minutes to hear any sign of movement. There was no sound at all. I started to think that the figure had given up and left. I didn't know what to do when I heard a knock at the door. I finally got the courage to sneak up to the door and peek through the peephole. A police officer was there, which made me feel better. When I opened the door, the officer told me that he had been driving by and seen a person on my house's roof with all the lights off. He came to check things out and make sure everything was fine. As the officer drove away, I let out a sigh of relief and thanked him for his help. I knew I was lucky to have escaped the terror in the woods that night, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I wasn't alone in the dark and that something was still out there waiting for me after the police officer left. Even though I was tired, I couldn't fall asleep, so I tossed and turned in bed for the rest of the night. The events of the evening were making my mind go fast. As soon as the sun came up, I finally fell asleep, but I had bad dreams about dark figures with evil smiles. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat and my heart was pounding in my chest. I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer, not with the threat of whatever was out there hanging over my head. So I got my things together and left, promising myself that I would never go back to that dark, scary place again. I moved to a new city and tried to forget about what had happened that summer evening. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was still out there, watching me and waiting for another chance to attack. I heard a tap on the window or a rustle in the bushes every time. I couldn't help but wonder if it was the dark figure coming to take me for good. I grew up in a small mountain valley that was surrounded by mountains on all sides, but it wasn't in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was about 30 minutes away by car or 15 minutes away by bus, and the closest city was about 2 hours away, not counting the time spent waiting for transportation. There were a fair number of kids in the valley. As a child, there were about 30 kids my age in my class. Even though there were so many kids my age, I never got along with any of them, and I didn't have much access to technology either. I belonged to a generation that grew up playing outside and using technology. If you don't count using family computers, I didn't use the internet until I was 12. I was lucky to have the forest to look around in. So when I was old enough, I could take my dog into the forest and wander around on my own. Since I went there a lot when I was a kid and was usually in charge. When I was 8, I was allowed to go exploring by myself. The forest was close to my house, and if I wasn't back by dark, my family would know where to look because they knew the forest as well as I did. Since then, I've always liked the forest. I finished elementary school and went about 20 minutes away to a high school. Then I met a few people I liked, but they all lived too far away for us to hang out often. I would either play video games or go into the woods by myself. By the time I was 15, I had been everywhere and could tell you everything about it. I also knew the terrain of each part and could find my way around using different landmarks. After spending hours a day in the forest for so many years, I had never seen anything strange or out of place. Okay, so I found the dead bodies of a few animals, which was a little scary. I was scared when I saw a fox for the first time, but I knew they lived in the forest, so I didn't take any bones as a souvenir. I knew I shouldn't touch it because I didn't want a disease, even if it would have let me skip school. When I was 16 years old, people started cutting down trees. I don't know why, but since I was the only one angry, I figured it had to happen. All that was left of the forest's beauty were a few chunks of trees, so I would still spend time there, but it wasn't nearly as much fun. I knew there would be less wildlife, but I didn't expect the forest to feel so dead. I heard that the people who were cutting down the trees just quit. They wouldn't say why they were stopping, but I'm glad they did because my favourite tree is still standing. If they hadn't stopped, it would have been cut. Now you know everything you need to know about this story. Here's why I'm telling you all of this. I still went on my usual walks in the forest, but this time a feeling of dread would always follow me. In late August, I had a fight with my family on a certain day. This was always the case. Since my parents go to bed around 9 p.m, I went to the mountain to take a walk and calm down. In the summer, it would stay light until 10 p.m. I decided to stay until about 9 o'clock at night and get home by 9:30. Around 8:45, I went to my favourite tree to have a cigarette. Yes, I know that smoking is bad for you, especially if you start so young, but I didn't care at the time. I lit my cigarette and set the lighter down next to my feet. At this point, I knew how to ignore the feeling of dread or drown it out with music. I sat there and did nothing for a while, just taking in the view. I've seen it get dark, but only a lot of times. I looked down at a part of the forest where sheep usually hung out and where a small stream ran through. If you walk a little farther from there, you'll find this cool rock. It's a lot. As I looked at the rock and thought about going there, I saw something move after my break. It was up high. I could tell as it moved through the trees, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Before I figured out that whatever I was seeing was probably meant to scare me, I didn't know what it was. It seemed strange, but I didn't pay attention to it. After about 10 minutes, I decided to go to the rock. If I did, my trip home would be easier, and I'd get to see the cool rock. So what's wrong? Well, I went through some trees and down a slope to get there. Then I followed the stream downstream. I passed where I had seen the shadow move, and my fear grew stronger. I kept thinking about the shadow. I tried to get rid of what I saw, which was wandering. Not believing in ghosts or other strange things, I thought that even if ghosts and other strange things were real, if they lived in this forest, I would have seen them sooner. I grew up here. I walked over to the rock and climbed on top of it, just like I always did. If you know which trees to look through, you can see a beautiful view of the mountains. And the extra height from the rock helps a lot, but the shadow was something I didn't expect to see. It moved slowly, as if it was being careful now. I could tell how big it was because I was much closer to it than before. It was tall and looked like a deer, but it stood on its hind legs and had human hands. It had a pair of long, curved antlers on top of its head. When it saw me, it stopped and looked at me. I usually felt tall when I stood on the rock, but I've never felt shorter than I did at that moment. We both just stood there. For a moment, the creature moved faster toward me than when it was looking around. I fell off the rock and hurt my ankle when I landed. I moaned in pain because I knew it was at least sprained. I'd sprained my ankle before, so I knew the pain. The creature didn't care that I was hurt. It kept coming my way. Even though it was still somewhat light out, we were now facing each other. For a few more hours, it got dark in the forest. I looked the thing straight in the eye. I wish I hadn't looked at its face. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have seen that mouth or those small yellow eyes. The worst part was the mouth. It was big and wide, with a lot of sharp, pointy teeth that didn't fit together. They were yellow and had a little bit of red on the teeth. This thing did not like people. I struggled to get up, and as I did, it almost hit me with its arm. I turned on the light on my phone and ran away without even looking back. Whatever that was, I never wanted to see it again. When I got to a break in the wall, the light was back on. I didn't know what it was, so I turned around, and it backed away into a dark part of the forest. I don't think twice before running home and going straight to my room. My ankle still hurt a lot, so I just stayed in bed while I looked through my bag for painkillers. I always had with me. When night came, I couldn't sleep because I was too upset. When I heard a scraping sound outside my window, I thought of all the worst things that could happen. Even so, I looked out, and there were those horrible teeth and everything. I quickly limped to my light switch and turned on my bedroom light. Of course, it ran away. I have learned something useful. It doesn't like light, so since then, it's been with me when I go somewhere dark. I have to carry a flashlight with me, and I keep a small lamp on by my window to scare it away. But I know it will get me one day, and I'm scared of it. So take my advice. If you're out exploring in nature and you start to feel scared, leave. You have no idea what you might find. It's a nice day in the summer. The breeze is a good place. When I looked into the man-made pond in my backyard, I caught a whiff of flowers. The trees and I reflected the calm waves in the water as the fish swam. What a great day to go hiking. I thought I had checked my weather app to see if there were any changes or warnings about the weather. My app said there was a 70 chance of light rain, which is fine with me because who doesn't like a little rain? The way it smells and feels. I live in a place full of trees and other natural things. It really is a very beautiful place to live. I know the area like the back of my hand, and we have 2 trails. A shallow creek that leads to a beautiful opening in the mountaintops, and a "Do Not Trespass" sign. So the land is just for me, my family, and the animals that live on it. I went to Trail 1 trail today. One has a trail that goes around it for about 10 miles. This trail goes around a small neighborhood about 4 miles away. Since I walk these trails almost every weekend, I know a lot of people in this neighborhood. There is a nice man who lives in a small blue house with a garden in front of it. When I walk by while he is watering his flowers, he always gives me a wave. Before I set out on my hike, I bought a small backpack to bring with me. I'm happy to start the trail with 3 water bottles, 2 granola bars, and a small pocket knife. I was happy, and the weather was great. I can see and hear the birds, the squirrels running up the trees and shaking the leaves as I walk by, and the small animals trying to hide in the bushes. After hiking for 22 minutes, I had gone 1 mile. I stopped to drink some water and catch my breath. I sat on the small stump of a dead tree that used to stand there, but had fallen over because of a strong storm. A few months ago, we were sitting, and I saw a cute little bunny go by. It was so soft and frail. I thought I opened my first water bottle with my teeth and poured it into my mouth like a fountain, but I heard it at that time. A loud, shrill scream came from deep inside the woods. The rabbit ran away, and as I stood up and looked around, I tried to figure out what it could be. I can't think of any animal that lives in these woods that could make that sound. I tried to ignore it because it could be a group of teens who went into the woods even though there was a sign saying not to. As I kept hiking, I could hear the gravel and leaves crunch under my feet. I was getting close to a neighborhood. What a satisfying sound until that ear-bleeding screech started up again. God! What the hell was that sound? This time it was louder, and I was still trying to figure out what that awful sound was. I keep walking through the woods, scared, and that's when it starts to rain. I catch a glimpse of a figure moving through the woods as fast as lightning out of the corner of my eye. Too quickly to see and too far away to recognize. It could have been a fox. Well, it wouldn't be running away from me right now if it wanted to hurt me. This time, the screams are coming from right behind me. It stung. I slipped in the mud and fell to the ground. I covered my ears with my hands and was almost crying as I lay on the ground in the rain. The pain, and that sound like glass breaking, is now making my ears ring. I stood up and looked around. which made me even more scared than before. Then I stopped and looked at my hands. Prints all over. When my ears started bleeding, I saw them out of the corner of my eye. I looked up. Many people stood far away behind trees and watched me. Very tall, at least 9 feet long and 3 feet wide. They looked like a black hole. I'll never forget how they looked at me. They were pure white, and when I look into them, I feel very uncomfortable and unwelcome. It seemed like they wanted me to leave, as if these woods and land belonged to them. Their arms were so long that they almost reached the ground. Their hands were long, disgusting claws that were very sharp. One of them slowly started dragging its claws on the tree, leaving a scratch mark and making that horrible screaming sound that I now know was coming from their open mouths. One of them slowly tilted its head, and as it did so, its neck made a cracking sound as it stretched and grew longer, breaking and snapping as it got taller. I didn't plan to stay and try to be friends with these horrible people. I just want to leave this place. I started running and didn't turn around. I heard leaves and plants being chewed on from behind, as if someone or something was coming after me. Don't turn around, I told myself over and over. I'm stupid to let my curiosity get the best of me because I'm curious. I turned around for a split second and saw 6 huge beasts coming at me like a pack of wolves chasing a small bunny, digging their claws into the ground and launching themselves toward me. One of them got its claws into my shoulder and pulled me down to the ground. So hard did I hit my head on the rocks below me. I lost consciousness for a second, and then, out of a need to stay alive and protect myself, I thought of my pocket knife. No, I didn't bring it with me. I looked back up to see a huge creature holding me down. Its jaw was hanging open and it was drooling over me. Its awful, horrible breath smelled like roadkill. Here we are. I know this is my last chance. It's getting ready to bite me. I'd do anything to stay alive at this point. I'm not going to let this thing eat me. I pulled my knees up to my chest and kicked the creature in the stomach. During the creature's confusion and weakness, it let go of one of my arms and I was able to get away. I started hitting it in the sides with my fists and scratching its eyes. It let out a painful shriek and let go of me. I climbed up and ran back through the woods. When I got to the small neighborhood, where an old man was gardening, I ran up to him and begged him to help me. He rushed me inside, took care of my wounds, and let me rest on his couch in the basement. When I was feeling a little better, I told him what had happened. He looked at me scared and said, "I'm going to be sick." He held his mouth open and walked to the kitchen sink. I ran over to him and asked what was wrong. He told me that he had seen a Wendigo and that I was lucky to have gotten away from it. Even though I'm writing this a year from now, I still sometimes hear those horrible screams coming from deep in the forest. Christmas has never been my favorite holiday because I still feel like I'm being watched. Yes, I like getting free stuff, but I always feel like the money I spend is worth more than the gifts I get. Besides that, I just don't like to spend a lot of time with a lot of my family, especially at big events. A lot of my family sees our family gatherings as a chance to get really drunk and argue with each other about politics and all sorts of other controversial topics. It was the same when my family got together for Christmas 5 years ago. I flew to my grandmother's house in southern Florida because everyone was supposed to meet there and eat and drink until they were full before going home. The year before, I only stayed at my grandma's house for about an hour, so my mom asked me to stay longer this time. She said that everyone loved seeing me, but I disagree because they were too busy arguing about what current trend was ruining the world. I stayed until about 10 p.m., then asked my mum to take me back to my hotel since I had a ride there. At first, she said she wanted to stay for a few more hours and suggested I take the bus instead of ordering another ride to save money. Anything that would have gotten me out of that house would have been a good idea. I remembered seeing the bus stop on the way to my grandmother's, and it didn't look like it would be too far to walk there. So I went because it seemed like a good idea at the time. I didn't know when the bus came or for how long, but I was willing to take a chance because walking back to my dorm in the middle of December would make me freeze. Luckily, it rarely gets below 70 in Florida during the winter. It was really nice to walk around at night and enjoy the quiet and fresh air. I had been thinking about what classes I would take next semester when I looked up and saw the bus stop about 30 feet away. I muttered under my breath when I realized that someone was sitting there as much as I hated being around my drunken family. Small talk with strangers was even worse. As I got closer, I could see more of the person sitting there. She looked like a nice woman in her mid to late 60s. Her hair was a big silvery ball of dark brown, and she wore big, thick-rimmed glasses. I have to admit that it took me a while to notice anything but her bright pink coat. It was 70 degrees, which was shorts and t-shirt weather, but I guess it wasn't unusual to see an older person in a sweater when it wasn't 90 degrees. I was just a few steps away from the bus stop bench when the woman turned around to greet me. She wished me a happy holiday and thanked me for coming back. I tried not to stare and just smile awkwardly, but what I thought was a pink sweater turned out to be a thick pink fur and feather coat. I'd never seen anything like it before. Most of the coat was pink fur, but the collar had enough feathers to cover 5 or 6 birds. She wore a long pearl necklace with what I thought was a long bird skull in the middle of it. I wondered if she liked strange clothes or if she was a big bird lover. When she blew her nose loudly, I jumped and was startled out of my thoughts. "How was your night, honey?" Her voice was dry and had an accent, but it was friendly. I couldn't quite place. I told her it was fine and asked her the same question again. She then told me a long story about her whole day. I lost track of where she was in her day around the time she was getting to the middle of it. I kept looking at her and nodding randomly. The sudden change of subject made them wonder where your family was. I answered her by joking that they were drunk and singing Christmas songs at my grandmother's house. She laughed and said something about how cute that was. I looked at my phone and saw that it had only been a couple of minutes. I didn't hear or see any signs that a bus was coming soon. I remember that my eyes were getting really tired. I shook my head to wake up, but the feeling didn't go away. "Excuse me, but do you know where my bird is?" When I looked at the woman again, she looked scared and confused. I probably did too, to be honest. My bird was in its cage, but he is no longer there. When I looked down, I saw a big old bird cage sitting between the woman's legs. When did it get there? I was pretty sure I'd never seen a big bird cage made of metal before. It was hard to remember or even think, because the tiredness I had been feeling turned into a slight feeling of dizziness. I felt like the ground was slowly spinning around me. "I see him. There's my sweetheart." The woman stood up and pointed across the street. Her voice was scratchy, as if she had become a chain smoker sometime in the last 2 minutes. I followed her finger and saw that she was pointing at something standing in the tall grass across the street. I couldn't tell what the shape was, but I knew it wasn't a person. It had wide, blocky shoulders, a long, wiry neck, and a big head in the shape of a circle, the place with the tall grass. The figure was standing, but it was in shadow, so I couldn't see any other details. I was sure that the figure was looking right at us. "Sweetheart, could you please go get him?" The woman's voice seemed to come from inside my head, and I moved toward the shadowy figure without even realizing it. As I got closer, the shadowy figure turned around so that its whole body was facing me. It shook and twitched as if it had electricity running through it. The closer I got, the faster my heart beat, and the more my instincts told me I was making a bad choice. But I couldn't stop myself. It was almost like I was obsessed with getting to whatever it was. I was halfway across the street when a sudden change in the moonlight made the creature bright enough for me to see something that could only have come from a nightmare. It spread its arms out like it was stretching a pair of wings. Its pale blue skin was tight and stretched over its thin body, and long, stringy pink feathers grew all over it. Its long, snake-like neck moved and slithered through the air in front of me. It never took its eyes off me, even though it looked like a pink human skull. It has tiny red eyes that shine brightly. I had no choice but to keep walking forward. I couldn't take my eyes off of whatever was standing in the grass in front of me. Its neck stretched out toward me, bringing us closer together until we were face to face. The bus horn's long, loud sound made me trip and fall backwards. The bus stopped behind me at the bus stop and was waiting when the horn woke me up from whatever trance I was in. I didn't hear it get there. Even how long it had been there was a mystery to me. When I turned around to look for the old lady in the pink feather coat, I didn't see her. Remembering the creature, I turned again and saw a tall man standing just outside the tall grass. He was dressed in torn clothes that were covered by a hood with writing and pink feathers. Several large bird skulls hung from a thick rope necklace, and he had several straps across his chest. Before the man lunged at me with a curved knife in one hand, I had been slowly moving away. I struggled to get up and then ran as fast as I could to the bus. The driver was confused and worried as she looked at me and asked me a few questions. Did I take something? And did I know that man was one of the first? I stuttered and rambled, saying a bunch of words that didn't make sense. She finally just told me to go to the back. I was the only person on the bus, and the old lady still wasn't there. The bus dropped me off about a block away from my hotel, and I made it to my room without any further problems. I don't think I'll ever forget how that thing looked as it stood in the grass. The fact that 3 people went missing in that area that night scares me just as much as that thing. I always wonder if those 3 people might not have been so lucky to escape that creature's gaze. My grandparents decided that, even though our old house was a good size, it wasn't big enough for our growing family. My grandma liked to close the door at night, which meant she wanted to be alone after spending the day with family and friends. As an introverted Aquarius, I completely understood her and was very thankful when she gave me and my brother a small plot of land behind the main house. It was far enough from the old house that it didn't feel like an extension of it, and my brother and I got to choose how it looked and what was inside. 2 teenagers have to make some big choices. We also felt very important and responsible, if I may say so. When we started building, though, something didn't seem right. Tools kept breaking or going missing. We started to get mad at each other. We even talked about giving up on the whole project because it was so hard. When we finally finished, though, we felt relieved, but that feeling didn't last long. For the first couple of months, there were knocks on doors, scratches on walls, sounds from the roof, and the creepy feeling that someone was following you from the main house to the cabin when it was dark outside. None of us were brave enough to walk the path from the main house to the cabin alone, not without at least our dogs, a strong flashlight, and a phone that is connected to one of the adults in the main house. We tried to laugh it off by telling each other that it was just the normal sounds of a new house settling in, and that our fear of the path to and from the cabin was just our minds playing tricks on us in the dark. The adults even told us to grow up, saying it was childish of us, and that we should act like adults if we wanted to live like adults and have our own home. I thought they were right for a second. But then, my brother, my boyfriend, and I saw the scariest thing I can think of one night. We were almost at the corner where the main house was. The flashlight was in the hands of my boyfriend. My brother used his phone as a flashlight, and I had some snacks and a blanket with me while taking care of our 2 dogs, which we always had with us. Both dogs stopped dead in their tracks. Their hair stood up, and they both started growling at something in the dark. My boyfriend and brother got in place on either side of me, and then they used their flashlights to look around the perimeter for what was making my dog act up. At first glance, nothing seemed strange, but then my boyfriend saw something in the lights that looked more like a shadow than anything else. The dogs started barking, and it was hard to keep them back because I didn't want them to go after whatever it was. My brother started shouting, "We see you, fool! Show yourself or we'll let the dogs go after you and call the police." But whatever it was just ran behind our cabin and away from us. Then both boys chose to run after the shadow. My dogs are almost going crazy right next to me. I decided to let go of one of them so it could go with the guys and protect them, while the other one stayed at my side as loyal and fierce as ever. I couldn't say the same for myself, since I was alone in the dark with only my dog to protect me and no light, because I was carrying the snacks. The boys were in charge of the flashlights. I was scared out of my mind. I tried to hear what the boys and the dog were doing because I didn't want them to get hurt, and I felt very helpless in the dark. If anything were to happen, I heard something rustling in the bushes nearby. I went from feeling relieved to too scared to too panicked in a split second, and I couldn't feel my heartbeat or catch my breath. My dog went completely quiet next to me and pressed up against me, trying to hurt me as I tried to get to the safety of the main house. Instead of doing what she said, I turned toward the sound because I didn't want anything to sneak up on me. If the danger came from me, I would at least look it straight in the eye. I told the dark, "I don't fear you," in a tone that was so convincing that it surprised me. I even felt like my dog respected my strength and stood with me when it was its turn. And for a second, everything was so quiet that even the wind couldn't make a sound. Then my other dog came out of the bush behind me, followed by my brother and boyfriend, all of whom were panting like crazy. "Who do you want to talk to?" my boyfriend asked while he was trying to catch his breath by bending over and grabbing his knees. I didn't answer him. I just checked on my dogs to see if they were hurt and praised them for being brave. Then she did the same thing to the men. Don't expect praise, but yell at them because they left me and put themselves in danger. The rest of the way to our cabin was on foot, and we checked every window, door, and of course, under the beds. But the whole time I felt like something was watching me from the bushes, trying to figure out what it was that wasn't afraid of the dark. After being gone for 5 months, my dog came home one morning. This is a story about his first 2 nights at home. I was about to start making coffee when I saw something brown through the kitchen window. At first, I thought I had left a coat on the porch, but when I looked more closely, I saw that it wasn't a coat but something alive. I almost jumped through the window when I realized that the animal on the porch was my dog Moose, who had gone missing 5 months before. I'll never forget the day I got off work late and found my house empty. Moose was always there to greet me at the door, whacking his bushy tail and sticking his tongue out of the left side of his mouth. Even though it was dead quiet that night, I tried to call his name, but he didn't answer. I looked through my whole house at least 10 times. When it didn't work out that way, I took my search outside and looked around the yard. Then I looked in the woods nearby. I could never figure out where he might have gone. I spent the next few days putting up posters everywhere and calling everyone I could think of. My hard work never paid off. My heart was broken. It was as if the moose had just vanished. Now, though, there he was on my porch, curled up in a ball. I pushed the door open hard enough. It was so happy to see my dog again that it almost flew off its hinges. After a warm embrace, I pulled away to get a good look at him. I noticed that he wasn't wagging his tail or making noises like he usually did, which made me worry. When I hugged him, it felt like I was hugging a statue. Then I saw something that made me yell out loud. His eyes were gone. They looked like they were taken out of him on purpose, not like something that happened by accident. I was shocked at first, but that quickly turned into anger. Who would do this to a sick animal? What kind of sick person would do that? I decided that the best thing to do would be to take him to the vet. The moose didn't make any noise or show any kind of emotion, so I took him there. As I picked him up and put him in the back of my car, I really did feel bad for him. I didn't know what he may have been through. I knew that whatever had happened was awful. I could see him being tortured day and night in a small, rusty cage. I bit my tongue so hard that I could taste iron, and I tried as hard as I could to get these kinds of thoughts out of my head. It wouldn't help me at all to think that way. I was just glad to see Moose again. As I drove, I started to feel uneasy. I looked up at the rear-view mirror and saw a moose sitting in the back seat. I almost went off the road when I did. His head was slightly tilted at an odd angle, making it look like he was looking right back at me through his empty eyes. For the rest of the ride, I didn't look again. We got to the vet finally, and I took him in. I took him to the vet to make sure there was nothing else wrong with him. I was told that he was doing well. Aside from the fact that my dog was now blind, I was also given medicine to help keep his eyes from getting sick and a pamphlet with tips on how to make their lives better. I finally got Moose home after a long drive during which I stared at the road and let Moose out of the car while giving the road my full attention. I noticed that he didn't seem to have any trouble getting up the stairs or getting into the house, which kind of scared me. I just thought that because he had been there so long that night, he had learned the layout by heart. I double-checked every door and window to make sure they were all locked. Moose tried to follow me to bed like he always did, but I led him out and back to the couch. I found it harder to fall asleep than I thought I would. I couldn't sleep because I could feel eyes on me. I kept looking through the cracks in my bedroom door, almost expecting to see someone. In the end, though, my eyes closed and I fell asleep. I woke up early in the morning, just as the sun was trying to peek over the horizon. I reached for my phone to check the time, but before I could get to it, I noticed a shape in my doorway. When I turned around, I saw a moose peeking through the cracks in my door and staring right at me. Even though he was barely lit, I could tell from his outline that something was wrong. He seemed to be bigger, and his shape had sharp points sticking out of it. As I looked at what I saw, my heart beat faster and faster. I think he must have seen me looking because he left slowly out the door. As he went back down the hall, I heard the floorboards bend and creak. I laid in my bed. After the sun had been up for a while, I opened my door a little and crept into the living room. I saw a moose sitting at the front door. He looked about right. I thought I was stupid for being afraid of my own dog. When I walked in, he turned his head and I patted him on the head. I was glad that when I walked in, I didn't see my dog turned into something horrible. I tried to take the blame for what happened, but I was still half asleep. A short time later, I got ready and left for work before I did. I made sure Moose had food and water, said goodbye and went to work. I was at work the whole time Moose was there. I just couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen that morning. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, I looked out the living room window and saw a moose looking at me. I say he was looking because the way his head was turned toward the window and he was staring at me in my car, I could almost feel his side on me. As I got out of my car and headed for the front door, I tried to ignore the goosebumps that were popping up all over my body. I put my foot on the first step and looked at the window. As I did, a moose hopped down from the window. I could tell where he was going. Moose were there right when I opened the door. I was happy for a moment because it made me remember how things were before he left. I patted him on the head and told him he was a good boy as I walked by. Even though he scared me a little, I've never been afraid of a moose. I still remember the day my parents got him from the shelter and brought him home. Since then, he's been by my side all the time. The rest of the night went as planned. I made dinner and gave Moose a healthy scoop of dog food, which he almost ate in one bite. Moose and I watched a movie in the living room. I don't have to work this weekend, so I had a few drinks while watching a movie. When I looked over at Moose, I saw that he was acting strangely. He was as stiff as a board and kept looking out the window into the dark as if he saw something. When the movie and my drinks were finally over, Moose was still looking out the window. I thought I'd look around the yard with the flashlight to calm myself down. I got the flashlight out. I stayed under the sink and opened my front door to look at my yard, which had turned into a bottomless pit. After dark, my house is far enough from the road that the light from the street lamps doesn't reach it. I looked along the tree line to see if anyone or anything was looking out. I felt like the trees were staring right back at me. After a few minutes of looking back and forth, I gave up and said I didn't know what had scared the moose so much. Moose was still looking out the window when I went back inside and got ready for bed. He only got up to follow me into my room, where I led him back to the couch and told him goodnight. That night I woke up to the sound of a moose barking. I bent down to get my phone and saw that it was 3:15 a.m. I ran out of my room, but halfway down the hall, I stopped. Something was wrong with the way the moose was barking. Every time he barked, it sounded like he was going to a lower pitch. It also didn't sound the way it used to. It seemed like a way to get something. I made my way slowly to the end of the hallway and peered around the wood paneling to see where Moose was. When I saw a moose, I was about to scream, but I put my hand over my mouth to stop myself. He looked like he had gained at least 50, but he hadn't. His back was arched up like a scared cat's, and parts of his spine were sticking out of his skin. Each vertebra that was showing was sharp and serrated, and his mouth was curled into a snarl. I was now so close to him that his bark seemed to shake me to the core, but he wasn't looking at me. His body was turned toward the window, the same one he couldn't stop looking at before. This time, when I looked out the window, I saw not only darkness, but also 2 wide eyes and a crazy smile. When I saw it, my heart almost jumped into my throat. Then his eyes, which had been on the moose, moved to me, and I couldn't stop screaming fast enough. The moose began to turn around. As he stood just a few feet away from me, his head turned with his body, and his empty eye sockets met mine. He stared at me for what seemed like an eternity, until I heard a knock on the door, and then what sounded like stifled laughter, like someone had their hand over their mouth and only let small bits of laughter out. As the knocking got louder, I turned my attention from the moose to the front door. The moose turned around to face the door and barked again. I could only stand there and shake. I had no way to move. I could hear my heart beating, and I was sure it was going to stop. The laughter got louder and louder as I watched this person's superhuman strength start to crack the doorway. The door started to crack and break as the man's red-soaked hands started to come through. Moose was making a low, guttural noise as the man tried to open my door by reaching one arm through the new hole in it. As he did this, he tore off little strips of flesh as he moved down. When the man's hand finally got a hold of the inside lock and started to turn it, Laughter broke out in the room and terror took over my whole body. As the door slowly opened, a skinny, at least 7-foot tall man was revealed. He stood right in front of the door with one of his bloody hands over his mouth and laughed like a child who was upset. There it is. Those were the only words he could get out before the moose charged him. When the moose hit the man, he flew through the air, crashed through the porch railing, and fell into the abyss. The moose followed right behind him into the darkness. I was sitting there with an empty bladder, while the man laughed and the dog howled less and less. How long I sat still before I got up and moved again. As you might expect, when I came to, the only thing I could think of to do was to call the police. I told what happened that night, but I didn't say what happened to the moose. I don't think they would believe that. At the time, I wasn't sure I believed what I had seen either. I just told them that a moose scared him away and that he hasn't been back since. I didn't have to wait long before my yard was full of sirens and blue lights. They had already asked me a few questions. A few police officers went to check the nearby streets and woods. I sat on a stool in my kitchen and tried to figure out what was going on. The sun had already risen. I heard something new. It didn't help me feel better at all. I was told that there were signs of a fight in more than one place, but they never found the man I described. There were also no signs of moose. A detective gave me his number and told me to call him if anything came up. When I got home, I was alone and trying to find something to do so I wouldn't be alone with my thoughts. I decided to go get a new door. No way in hell was I going to sleep without one. Well, that's assuming I could even sleep. I went to Lowe's for a long time and didn't talk to anyone. When I got home, I got to work. It was slow at first as I had no carpentry experience whatsoever. Along with last night's events playing on an endless loop in my head, I found myself worrying about Moose. I was scared senseless the moment I saw him, but somehow I still thought of him as my dog that night. It felt like he was trying to protect me. I hoped he was okay. I wanted him back home even though he wasn't the same dog I knew before he disappeared. I finished putting in the new door the best I could. I was honestly proud of myself. It actually turned out better than I'd hoped. The remainder of the day was spent periodically checking outside and doing chores around the house to quiet my thoughts. I had just finished eating dinner when I heard movement on my front porch. It was muffled behind the door, but I could tell something was there slowly rising to my feet. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, seeing that man's crazed eyes and smile in my mind. My heart rate quickened as I held my breath while creeping up to the door. I was trying my best to stay calm, but I was losing the battle. I slowly looked through the peephole in the door and dropped the knife to the ground. I didn't see the man from the night before. Instead, Moose was lying curled up on my welcome mat. All fear I had of him drained out of me as I opened the door and wrapped him in my arms, just like I had done when he showed up a few days ago. There were cuts all over him and a large gash in his leg, which I quickly wrapped the best I could. Moose laid on the floor panting as I made him a meal and called the vet, completely forgetting that they weren't open. I just sat with him for a while to make sure he was okay until I noticed he had fallen asleep. It's been a few weeks since then. Now me and Moose are almost inseparable. Slowly, as time passed, he began to act more lively like he was before he vanished. I haven't seen him in that form like he was that night. I still think about it every once in a while, but then I take a good look at him and honestly it doesn't really affect me anymore. I know Moose would never hurt me every night. I still make sure my house is secure. Not to keep Moose in, but keep whoever showed up that night out. The police never found the men. I still dream of that face in my window and it makes my blood turn to ice. One more thing that's changed after that night. I no longer bow Moose from my bedroom at night. He follows me and then lays on the new dog bed I have placed right beside me. Good boy, good boy.